what success is and what some of the indicators are, you can't start to even talk about to figure out what are the factors that lead to those, lead to improvements on those kind of measures of progress. So to me, from a social scientific or government analyst standpoint, is you better have a clear idea and set indicators to know what you're doing to begin with. So that's the first point. It's not predictive, but what I'm talking about is a prerequisite for that. Second, how do we know, if we know what we want to achieve and we know what it looks like, how do we figure out what are the factors that can bring us to those kind of desirable outcomes? That's when you start looking at the various kinds of conditions. As scholars, we call those independent or predictor variables. Government analysts or something would call them causal, other kind of factors. And I would agree with you, from what we know about democracy as a desirable end and the conditions that facilitate that, you don't really see most of those in Afghanistan. You see a few more of those in Iraq. The basic kind of conditions that lead to stable democracies, widespread political participation, stability, aren't present in Afghanistan, and if one looks at historically there, have never been and may account for why you've never had it kind of there. So I would agree. I've been criticized when I've said on Afghanistan is in some ways we know what our higher aspirations are for goals of what we would like the Afghan society to look like, and I think the international community shares those. But what we can realistically achieve there, I think, is far more limited, particularly in a time frame of 5 or 10 years, which is what the UN Secretary General and President Obama have sort of talked about as kind of a time frame. So to expect a fully functioning democracy with stability and a peace agreement where the standard of living improves from one of the worst in the world to somewhere in the middle, or to move them off of number 2 on the worst corrupt countries in the world to something a little better, is probably unrealistic, at least in the next 5 to 10 years. And anything we talk about in 50 or 100 years is going to be largely speculative.
We're going to take one more question and then wrap things up.
That's good.
How about female literacy as a surrogate for progress?
That's one. One of the things that I didn't talk about, because they're pretty much kind of widely known, there's a whole slew of indicators that one could look at. All you'd have to do is go to the UN Millennium Goals, and they have a lot of specific indicators that deal with female literacy, female education level, which is highly correlated with development. They have a whole string of those along a series of dimensions. Any of those would be, I think, kind of good kinds of signs. I outline local security, rule of law, and local governance in many cases because I consider those important first steps before we can even talk about major economic growth, social justice issues, and other things like that.
I'd like to invite you all to join me in thanking our speaker. And we hope you can join us again next week.